Hello, everyone. Hope you're doing well. Welcome to today's 60-minute digital roundtable discussion entitled The Future of Online Notary Services. Where do we go from here? Just a few housekeeping rules before we begin. If you're dialed in by phone, you can use *6 to unmute yourself. If you're logged into the Zoom meeting room, please note we have a chat box in the toolbar at the bottom of the screen to type questions for the panelists. As a reminder, this particular session is being recorded today. The recording will be posted on the ILTA website shortly after the session concludes. Lastly, please keep in mind this is not a presentation, but a conversation. Your input and opinions are appreciated and welcomed. With that, I will turn it over to John to begin with introductions. John?
Thank you, Brian. We really appreciate that. There we go. Thank you very much, Brian. We appreciate that, and thank you for your assistance with this. My name is John Graves, and I am a training support specialist for the law firm of Winstead, PC. I'm going to go ahead and bring up a picture here, although that might scare you more than welcome you. We are so excited to have you here today. You know, being an online notary is an exciting promise of the continuation of a service that is so important to what we do in the legal community. You know, back when the pandemic hit, it was a question as far as online or as far as notary publics and, you know, how that was going to work. And with online notaries, it's really gotten us back in the groove of being able to help. But where are we going from here? The pandemic's waning down. We're beginning to see more in-person notarizations. Is online notary even going to continue? Well, it absolutely is. I'm going to assure you of that. And we have a distinguished panel here today to discuss where do we go from here. So I'd like to introduce these three people. The first one is Nancy Pratt. Nancy is the Senior Business Strategy Manager for DocVerify. They are one of our online notary vendors. Nancy, say hello to everyone.
Hi, everybody. Good morning. And we're really happy to be a part of this panel. So looking forward to our conversation today.
And that is going to be a conversation. That's something that Brian mentioned earlier that I definitely want to stress. We're not trying to do a presentation and you're just expected to sit there and listen. If you have questions, we want those questions. Now, I do believe we are going to wait to take the questions till the end of the presentation. So if you want to put those in chat throughout the presentation, we can go back through and make sure we answer those when we get to a point in the session. But we are excited to be able to make a conversation about those and to discuss any kind of questions or concerns you might have. Our next distinguished panelist is Lori Hamm. She is the Notary Administrator for the Secretary of State for the state of Montana. Lori, say hello to everyone.
Hi, everybody. It's nice to be here. I've been looking forward to this conversation, and I'm sure we're all going to be able to learn and share some great information today.
Absolutely, Lori, and welcome to the panel. We're excited to have both you and Nancy. Our third panelist today is one that I am very excited to have with us, in addition to Nancy and Lori. We've got Kathleen Butler. She is the Executive Director of the American Society of Notaries. Kathleen, say hello.
Hi, this is Kathleen. It's so great to be here with everyone today. It's a real privilege, especially to have yet another opportunity to talk notary with two of the best experts in the country on their particular subject matters in Nancy and Lori. So we are all excited about bringing you guys a really great presentation. And one of the key points we wanted to make while getting into this conversation, John, if I may just go ahead and make it, because it's really our big overriding big thought of the day. And that is, with respect to notarial acts, the formalities and assurances of notarization are always the same. In other words, the notary is always required to perform certain steps. When the notarization is complete, those assurances of notarization are consistent. They have been throughout centuries. The other piece that's really important to keep in mind is that the means and manner of performing a notarization varies by state. That's really the only difference. So as we talk about some of the transformative ways that notaries can perform notarial acts today, try to keep these two big ideas in mind as we discuss. And so thank you so much for letting me be here, and thank you, John.
Absolutely, Kathleen. Thank you so much. I think we want to go ahead and start this conversation because there's a lot of interesting questions that I think we could pose, but one of the key things, and Nancy, I'd like to go to you first if that's okay, is that remote notary services have been around for a while. We've had them, as you mentioned earlier, Kathleen, for centuries. We've had notarial services of some sort. So where are we at today? What would you call, Nancy, the current state of the union?
Well, I would say that, when we take a look at in the last 10 years, because obviously Virginia started in 2012, and then with our panelist, Lori Hamm was the second one in the country of starting RON in 2015. And so we have a real pioneer on our panel today. But as we move forward, a lot happened, through the pandemic, starting out with executive orders, as we all know, and then leading into legislation to where we're really down to about 43 states now that have some sort of legislation. And so, we're saying 43 because right now Delaware is just sitting on the governor's desk to be signed. And so we believe that will be the 43rd state. We're watching the District of Columbus, the DC area pretty well. That's in legislation, it's in process, may get through, as well as Massachusetts. Massachusetts is interesting for any of our viewers who are in Massachusetts. When that goes through, they're all scrambling around this next week or so while the legislation is still moving to get all their bills through. And so, Massachusetts may still go through. We've got, certainly the states where there's nothing going on is California, Connecticut, Georgia, Mississippi, South Carolina. South Carolina has just passed in-person e-notarization and is doing that, but no RON in those states. We also, some of you may have noticed that the Secure Act, which is the national RON bill, if you will, has been passed by the House, but it is sitting in the Senate. And there's question as to whether or not that will get done this year. There is opposition to it in the Senate, so it'll just depend on what happens. And what that bill actually does, the Secure Act, is it allows for RON in every state. So those states that haven't passed any legislation, this would give them a framework to start RON. There's a lot of questions around that. We can debate that later, maybe through the conversation, but that's what it does. It touts some really just very basic guidelines around RON, not necessarily real high bar around the technology. And it says that it covers kind of interstate commerce, which is, one can argue eSign did that piece when attached to UETA. So anyway, so we can kind of talk about the Secure Act maybe as we proceed today, but that's where it's at right now, and we'll see if it gets through the Senate. So the State of the Union is really good. And, and we can, pretty much do RON throughout the country.
Do you guys mind if I jump in real quick? Because I would hate for this kind of setting of the table to be missed. And gosh, Nancy just queued it up perfectly, but we're talking about RON, Remote Online Notarization, but I think it would really interest the audience, and Lori and Nancy and I have discussed all of this at length, to realize that we have 3 different categories of authorization out there for a notary public to officiate for a remotely located individual. And so just real quickly, we have permanent statutes that authorize remote online notarization, which involves an electronically signed electronic document, and in a few states, paper documents as well. We also have permanent statutes authorizing remote notarization involving an ink-signed paper document. And then we have temporary statutes, those that have a very specific sunset date, or temporary COVID emergency authorizations that are still active, that authorize various iterations of audio, video notarization, and all of these were primarily in response to the COVID pandemic, and they run the gamut in the methodologies and procedures that a notary would follow in order to, carry out this audio, video notarization. So just to try to be as clear as we can, we wanted to focus today really on remote online notarization, the permanent statutory authority for that particular methodology, because it's the one that is the most prevalent and, is really the topic of greatest interest within our space. So thanks.
Absolutely. I love that point that you were making about which one. I was just about to ask on behalf of the audience, can we give a better definition of what an online notary is? Because I know we have some people that are even considering this process that don't have it in their law firms right now and may not be clear on what we're talking about. So thank you for that clarification. That was well timed. Lori, what about you? Do you have something to throw in here on those questions? Where are we at? I know being with the Secretary of State for Montana, you would be especially an expert on the state of Montana, but jump in here for a minute. Tell us a little bit about what you would know about this question.
Well, I do see it maybe in two ways, kind of an umbrella view, because I've been so active in the discussion since about 2014, and I've been an advocate for online notarizations all along. It's been very gratifying to me to see how it's evolved, and going back to the initial discussions in the post Virginia adoption, pre Texas and Nevada, when everybody was still debating whether it could be done. And then after, we saw an evolution in, 2017, 2018, 2019, where, we saw some significant adoptions. I think it was at the beginning of 2020, just prior to COVID, there were about 20 states that had enacted some kind of online notarization. So it was moving, from one in 2012, there were two in 2015, 5 years later, there were 20 states adopting it. And I was just kind of reminiscing this morning. It was 3 years ago this month that Montana was getting ready to go live with our 2019 expansion of the remote online notarization. And I was putting together a symposium, bringing people together to, here it is, introduce it, this is a great thing. And we filled a ballroom at a local hotel with business leaders and notaries and government officials, and presented an overview with the leading players on the team. And at the end of the day, everybody kind of go, wow, this is cool, this is really neat, but I don't think we're going to use it. And then COVID hit. And, in the two years, 2020 to 20, where we are now, 2.5 years, RON is a thing. People not only recognize it as a tool, but they're embracing it. We see that from businesses, from government, especially from notaries. So that whole methodology of performing a notarial act is expanded, and the acceptance has been really quite gratifying, I think.
That's a great point, Lori. And, as an online notary, I know that it's been very good to be able to satisfy the needs of our clients from my firm using the online notary platform. So it is gratifying to know that we can continue to work toward common goals on that. I'm really excited about that. Kathleen, did you have anything else to add about this topic or the question?
No, I think we kind of have a pretty good basic State of the Union going, so we can move forward. Thank you.
Fantastic. So I want to go to Lori with this question. What are the states and the regulatory bodies looking at today? You know, I've heard different things. I know several states, as y'all mentioned earlier, are at different points in their acceptance of this, but are they looking at specific points before they will adopt or accept the technology? Or, you know, what are we looking at in the states in the different areas?
Yeah, that's a broad question, John, because depending on where the states are in terms of adopting remote notarization, you know, states like Delaware and Maine, and you know, the ones that have just very recently adopted, of course, are, you know, up to their eyebrows in just getting the statutory enactments implemented, which from a state perspective is huge. You know, when we implemented our 2019 law, fully enacted law, I thought I knew what I was in for. And it's massive, because we're dealing not only with the technological aspects and the providers and the vendors, but also with the notaries. And you know, all the states are kind of at a different level. We just recently, Nancy and Kathleen and I were all part of the Notary Public Administrators Conference at the Baton Rouge during the National Association of Secretaries of State Conference. And it was pretty clear at that event that, you know, state administrators are at different places on the spectrum. For those of us that were early adapters, we've kind of driven down the highway a bit, if you will, and we're starting to see the potholes. We're running into situations where, for example, we're discovering that notaries are not always comfortable with some of the basic fundamental notary practices. So the need for additional education is definitely highlighted. And I think most of the states now are recognizing that that's an important priority for us, is to provide information and education just on fundamental notary laws and practices. And we've reached out to the national associations, Kathleen's group and others, to help us fulfill that requirement. I think we're also looking now at, you know, an influx of new providers and vendors out there. When we started on the road, you know, in that pre-COVID era, there were very few. There were maybe, what, Nancy, about a half dozen providers, and we knew everybody and they knew us. And now there are about 50 providers out there. Some of them, you know, I mean, daily we're hearing about new ones. So as regulatory bodies, sometimes I feel like I'm, you know, just a firefighter putting out little fires that on different fronts at all times.
Hey, Lori, I wonder if I could jump in real quick and mention something that you didn't, but oh my gosh, it just further reinforces the incredible juggling act at the state level. And that is a law being enacted to authorize remote online notarization is just the first part of the challenge, because almost all of the enactments gave broad rulemaking authority to the commissioning officer of the state to get more granular, to be very specific about requirements for education or technology requirements, or otherwise flesh out some of the nitty-gritty details. So not only do states have a new law, but they have to then grapple with the really granular details and decision-making behind administrative rules that they write to flesh it all out. And at the same time, trying to juggle all of the things and put it all into a cohesive package that Lori is describing. So it's been an incredibly tough challenge for the states. They've risen to the challenge, but it's been very tough.
And I think to jump in, I think because of that, some associations, like certainly like Kathleen's and other associations have stepped in to fill some of that void, but also Mismo has stepped in to try to put some framework around remote online notarization as a kind of a template for the secretaries of states, for the notary administrators. And so when we first developed that at Mismo, and just for Mismo, you guys, it's the Mortgage Industry Standards Maintenance Organization. And in the past, that was all just a bunch of kind of techie people that did a lot of XML so that companies could talk to each other. But in 2018, they saw this need to educate and to put some framework around remote online, and brought stakeholders in from every industries and brought them in to have this discussion, and developed a standards, if you will, around remote online notarization, which addressed what are the basic technical guidelines that you need to have to provide security, to provide all of the protocols to do a RON safely, if you will. And then they actually certify RON platforms under that standardization that they developed. And in this last year, we have actually taken that document back out, taken a look at it to see if there's anything that we need to update and anything we need to expand. I mean, there hasn't been a lot of changes on that document because there haven't been a lot of changes really in RON yet. I think in the future, we'll probably talk about that later on, but in the future, we might see some more changes. But anyway, that document has been a very good, I think just the framework, if you will, how to implement from a technology standpoint and what you should have in your regulations and rules. And so a lot of times you'll see from a vendor's perspective in the States that one of the questions when we're trying to get approved in that state is, are you a RON certified, a Mismo RON certified vendor, which means your platform's gone through a complete audit and it's living under those guidelines. So the states have adopted and have looked at that framework and put that in the regulations and rules in a lot of cases. So that's another body that has stepped up to fill a void and provide assistance for those secretaries of states, because all of them don't have technology departments, right, Lori? Some are a little bit better than others. So this has been a helpful tool, I think, for everybody.
Yeah,
it's been incredibly helpful. Montana is one of those states where, the notary division is, it's kind of the shoebox division, if you will, very, very limited personnel. And, if it weren't for the infrastructure that was provided by Mismo, we'd have no guidelines in terms of approving states. And I think Kathleen can speak a little bit more broadly than I can in terms of the different business models that states are dealing with in terms of, the platforms and the technologies, the states that are very minimal regulating them to those that are more robust in those. And I think that might be helpful, Kathleen, if you would.
Oh, you mean with respect to what states are maybe requiring in their administrative rules and that kind of thing?
And the type of business models that the providers are the states are requiring for the providers, the ones that are doing the very robust approval processes. And
sure, maybe a gateway into that conversation, and I appreciate that point, Lori. A gateway into that conversation is, we are talking diversity here. There is nothing particularly overwhelmingly uniform in the state's approaches, and because they're all making their way They're trying to figure out what works. And so the first piece of that is there are like essentially 4 different models out there that you can roughly group all the states into with respect to how they onboard technology systems and essentially either, approve them or make them known to notaries. And so that first model is actual system approval, where the commissioning officer of the state, it actually reviews the technology, compares the technology's performance to statutory and administrative rule standards, and issues a yes or no, you're approved or not approved. So that's the first model. The second model is simply pointing notaries to the performance standards for the technology that may be either in the statutes or administrative rules, and requiring the notaries to only use technologies that conform to those standards. That's a challenge in and of itself because, notaries are notaries, but they're not necessarily technologists. But be that as it may, that's, yet another standard that we have for how these technology systems more or less get onboarded. Then we have the model called self-certification. These are all just, our industry's insider terms for this, but with self-certification, a platform would essentially certify to the commissioning officer that their technology complies with all of the requirements, both functional and technology-wise, that are provided in statutes and rules. And finally, there's a tiny little handful of states with no requirement whatsoever for kind of onboarding these technology systems. And essentially it is up to the notary to realize that, as with any other provision of notary law, any provision in their law that dictates something about the technology they can use must be satisfied in their choice of technology. So, in that respect, we've got these 4 different models, and states are grappling with how to effectively organize themselves and the knowledge that they have on their team and the knowledge that's available to them outside of their teams to even make some of these decisions. So it's a tricky landscape. Lori, would you agree with that?
Absolutely. And I think that's definitely one of the priorities for state administrators now looking forward. What's our role? What should our role be in, taking the way things are, and how are we going to improve it for notaries particularly, but also for the public? How can we make it a more reliable, desirable, better option for the purposes of notarization?
And I think from a vendor perspective of having, every time a state passes regulations, then I have to go in and obviously become extremely familiar with the rules and the regulations of that state, because it's imperative that we get the platform to where it is working with the proper state seal, the little nuances around the journals, all of those things that are part of the rules, right? And every state requires that I think almost every state requires we fill out an application. And then there are states that, we have to we have to go through the whole audit where they look at the system, we do the demo. And then there's some states that we fill out 20, 30 page thing. And it goes through everything imaginable around security and everything else. So from a vendor perspective, I think that's good, because I think it can kind of weed out some of those vendors who have just started a business on a whim. Someone that said, hey, I've got a Zoom account, I've got a GoToMeeting. Heck, maybe I can start a Ron vendor company. And so, I think there should be a little more insight around the technology and the securities, because really, when it's all said and done, the vendor is the vehicle. It's going to take everybody for the ride, and you're going to have, the horn and lights and everything else to make that ride good. But, you know, it's going to require that the people have a license that they're going to get from, you know, from Kathleen. She's going to provide that license so they know how to drive the vehicle. And then there's going to have to be the rules of the road that the lorries are putting out there so that we can have a secure process, because it's for not just to protect the notaries, but to protect the citizens that are having these processes done. And I think Lori said it best not too long ago. She said, you know, Ron just showed the weaknesses in notaries, right, Lori? Ron highlighted what those weaknesses are.
It did. In a lot of cases, we did see notaries, you know, come on board and think that the Ron platforms were going to do everything for them, and they were shocked. Shocked that they had to know how to complete a notarial certificate. They had to know, you know, what the statutory requirements were for the script during the session. So and
I had to know the difference between an acknowledgement and a jurat, right, Lori?
Exactly, the fundamentals. You know, and I think, you know, the thing that we're maybe not expressing, but that's coming together, the message is that the notaries out there, the businesses that are adopting Ron technologies have to understand that ultimately it's their responsibility to know that the providers and the notaries really do understand that it's not the association's responsibility, it's not the state's responsibility. It is the user and the notary's responsibility to make sure that they have a statutorily compliant system and that they are using it correctly.
Oh my gosh, Lori, do you mind if I jump in? Because that is a perfect segue to the challenge that we have with respect to notaries. And I say this with all respect because we have all kinds of notaries out there, right? We have deeply experienced notaries. We have some who have been at it a little while and they're really starting to get their groove on about how to perform notarial acts compliantly. And then we have brand new notaries. And I'm really talking mostly about that last group of notaries, because a quirk in this entire new paradigm of notaries being able to perform these technology-assisted notarizations is some individuals who have never been a notary are completely intrigued by this. They want to become a notary specifically to perform, you know, a technology-assisted notarization using, you know, audio-video technology. And so they become a first-time notary. And within that same commissioning process in some states, they're able also to be authorized to start performing audio-video notarizations. And, you know, so with that in mind, I'll make this comment. One of the biggest challenges we have in the notary world is there are notaries out there who don't know what they don't know. They've not had the deeply intensive training that some states require as a commission qualification just to understand what the fundamental requirements of notarization are. And you'll remember at the top of today's conversation, you know, I mentioned that, you know, there are always certain assurances of notarization that never change, but the means and manner of compliantly performing those notarizations do vary by state. So, you know, we have a real challenge of notaries kind of conflating, well, first of all, not having a deep enough base of education and practical experience to navigate doing something like this in a transformative environment. And then, you know, we also have, well, I mean, I should really let the point go there because I've made it already. We just really need notaries to have and embrace more opportunities to get a solid base of notarial practice training. Oh, and here's what I was going to say, and not have them conflate the formalities of notarization with the function of a technology. Because no matter how they're performing the notarization, they have to make sure that they are accomplishing all the required steps of notarization. The technology does not do that for them. It facilitates their formalities. And we have too many notaries getting into this that think they really are just clicking buttons on a technology, and they're not realizing that they are the keepers of the flame when it comes to a compliantly performed notarial act, and that the technology is simply enabling them to do that. So for me, that's one of the biggest concerns that our organization has. And I feel confident that, you know, my colleagues share that concern, because Lori in particular would see this kind of thing every day.
Well, and we heard that loud and
Kathleen.
clear at the NAS convention, because, you know, the sad thing is when these laws are passed, the legislation doesn't take into account in the states for the education piece. So in some states, you just have to be 18 and speak English and be able to, you know, pay $40 or $25 for the application and no education. And that really is, we heard that loud and clear from the notary administrators, just saying, you know, their hands are tied. If it's not written in there, they can't require the educational component. Huge piece of a kind of a missing piece, if you will.
Yeah.
So ladies, I want to take this conversation just in a slightly different direction now, because I know I've seen some things pop up in chat, and I've always been interested in this next question that we have. But, you know, Kathleen, you were mentioning earlier about the importance of compliance with the vendors and things that have been considerations. For a lot of the firms that are out there, they don't have a current vendor, or they're in the middle of the consideration of one. So I want to ask this question. I think I want to start with Lori. How do you select the right RON vendor, and what qualities should these firms be looking for? Where do they even begin?
John, that's a huge, huge challenge for businesses and notaries, because as I mentioned at the very beginning, we now have approximately 50 vendors out there offering a RON platform. You know, they're popping up like weeds. And most states, this goes back to, again, our previous conversation, the business models for the state's approval, or the state's approval process of those vendor models. You have to know what your state's approval means. In Montana, we have very, very minimal standards. My law says that if a vendor can attest to me that he meets the standards that we've set, and we've adopted Mismo and NAS standards, if they attest that they meet those and are able to comply with any of the other requirements in Montana law, we have to approve them. It's a very minimal standard. So, you know, you need to know, first of all, what does approval mean in the state that you're in? You know, finding out, just checking to see that your vendor is approved in the states that you operate in. I know a lot of your members are located in multiple states. They have offices all over. That's going to affect, you know, what vendors you might be selecting. It's not, you know, when we started, you know, 2016, 2019, kind of, there were a half dozen vendors. We were good. You know, it was easy enough to do. Now that is a whole challenge all by itself, just finding out what vendors are available and what level of approval they've received. Is that sufficient for you? And along with that, I think each business, each industry needs to look at the Mismo standards, the NAS standards, and determine whether they're really sufficient for the type of notarial work that your business is doing. You know, you may need to set your own standards. That you need a vendor that's got, you know, higher security standards, for example, than the state that you're operating in is requiring. So, yeah.
Oh, Lori, that's a wonderful point. I'm not gonna belabor it. Just the state laws are essentially a floor, and you can make a private business decision to have higher standards for your own firm transactions. I think that's a wonderful point.
And I highly recommend that businesses, industries, professions do kind of come together and look at these standards and decide if they're strong enough for them. Understanding, as Kathleen pointed out, government sets the minimum daily requirement, not necessarily the highest and best. And I think for most industries, and the mortgage industry sets some pretty high standards actually in terms of what they've done. So a Mismo standard it is definitely not the lowest standard, but not all states require Mismo certification or establishes that. So as a customer, as a potential RON service provider, you need to explore that.
I would think, and I also think
that, Lori, I'm so sorry, Nancy.
No,
I was just going to add a quick follow-up on that. So, Lori, is there a place that people can go to see a list of vendors that are certified for each particular state? Is there a central place they can look?
You want me to jump in on that, Lori?
Yes, please.
So each state lists the approved vendors. So if the state has you can go to the state and see what vendors are approved in that state. And then you can also, if you want to look at what vendors are approved through Mismo, through the RON Mismo standards, and they've gotten their certification, you can go to mismo.org and you can find those vendors that are approved that have gone to that extra step, because it's expensive too to get that certification, because they hire a third party to audit the system. And so, people who are just starting a business on a shoestring probably wouldn't pay that additional money, right? And so you can also go and you can look at that. And the other thing I was going to say is, you're looking at, for our group today, when you're looking at what vendors to select, I think you need to decide, what do you specialize in? Because all vendors don't specialize in the same things. So there are some vendors who strictly specialize in mortgages and really don't do general notary work. And then there's, other vendors that do all of it, that do general notary work as well as mortgage. And then there are some vendors that specialize in wills. And so you certainly want to, when you're looking at your firm and what kind of work that you want to do, you certainly need to match your vendor with your work and make sure that you're getting that vendor that will complement the type of work that you're doing in your firm. I just wanted to add that piece, John.
That's fantastic, Nancy. I think that for the firms that are watching, and several here have indicated that they are just now looking for a vendor, I think that's important information for them to have. And even a couple of them have mentioned something about, and this was something I wanted to bring out, when you say they can find the approved vendors on the state, I think specifically most of where I've seen that information is on the Secretary of State's website.
That is, it is, yeah, you're right, John.
Exactly. And I think a lot of the Secretaries of State, if not all of them, have a notary division that you can work with to find out that information and get more information about the knowledge that you might need to start a program like this. So I think that's something that's important. Does a vendor have to be recognized by the state?
But John, keep in mind, in some states, the notary division might fall under the lieutenant governor or the attorney general too. So
that's a good point.
Yeah, so do keep in mind that when you're in your state where that notary division falls under, or you're going to be in the Secretary of State pulling your hair out looking for that. You're not going to find it.
That is a great point. I'm glad you mentioned that. So, yeah. Does a vendor need to be recognized? Do they have to be recognized by a state, or do the states accept notarial acts from a non-recognized vendor?
It's been my experience that if a lot of states, and most states, I would say probably, well, the majority of states require that the notary select a vendor, and that vendor needs to be selected from that approved list. Now, the approval process, to Lori's point, varies from state to state. But I believe that all states would require that if they're going to publish a list of approved vendors, the vendor needs to be from that list.
Nancy,
Lori,
I'm
is that correct, Lori or Kathleen?
yeah, I'm glad to jump in on that. Yes, and really, to Nancy's point, you really need to know what the state practice is, because you know, I noticed that there are states whose laws or rules neither require approval by the state, but the commissioning officer has a list on their website, and they strongly suggest that notaries choose from that list. So it's their attempt to try to, you know, at least provide some kind of quasi-secure, you know, gateway, if you will, to the brave new world of remote notarization. You know, we talked a little bit earlier about those 4 different models of onboarding of technology providers, and it runs the gamut from a very rigid system approval process all the way to there's just no requirement, with the majority of them kind of falling in the middle with, you know, as to Lori's point, the notary having to strictly adhere to statutes and rules, and or you know, the notary choosing someone who's self-certified that they comply.
Can I jump in here a little bit and take this question just one little step off the path, though? Because John, the way you phrased that question in a minute ago, as far as a firm choosing a vendor, as long as you choose a vendor that has, if necessary, has been approved for the notaries in your state, even if they're doing a notarization for a signer located in another state that hasn't approved that particular vendor, that notarization would be accepted. So the vendor notary relationship is dependent upon the notary's commissioning state, not where the eventual notarization itself would be used, or, you know, whether, say, you know, the notary is located in Montana, for example, and we have our list of approved vendors. Our notaries have to choose one of those vendors. They can do a notarization for a signer in California that doesn't even have RON available. That document notarized by one of our approved vendors will be accepted in California. Yeah. So for the customer standpoint, you don't have to make sure that a vendor has been approved in all the states that you operate in for acceptance of documents.
Good point.
Lori, that's so fantastic. And just to put a little squiggle on that, the epicenter of applicable law is the state where the notary has their commission. And so, you know, it's any legal research that would stem from a transaction would go to the notary state. And Lori, you know, I'm so glad you brought up interstate recognition. Every state has a law on its books that ensures that a validly performed notarial act, well, let me rephrase that. A notarial act performed under the laws of state A will be accepted by state B. And, you know, that makes notarization accessible, reliable, all across the country. And so it would be no different here with respect to remote notarization laws.
Right.
I think that's a great point, Kathleen, and thank you and Lori both for bringing this up, and Nancy for your contributions to it as well. I think it's a challenge for us as notaries to do when remote notarization first came around. Was it going to be accepted? And I know there have been some challenges in different levels of agencies that you want to go file something in a county clerk's office in a state that does not have remote notary, and it was done validly from a different state. And there has been some pushback on that. So, you know, I think that's a challenge, but at the same point, I think that we are beginning to see that come around, and more agencies are beginning to recognize that it was valid at the time it was done, so we're going to go ahead and accept it. So I'm not seeing nearly as much of that as I used to see when I first got started. I know we're running kind of short of time here before we take questions, so I want to circle back around. And Nancy, I'll direct this to you first, and then if Lori and Kathleen could follow on this. But from each of your perspectives, give me an idea of where you see the industry in the next 5 years.
You know, that question always makes me smile, because I've been in this now for 20 years, and we've always talked about this adoption in 5-year increments. And so, you know, we joke, there are several of us that have been around this long, and we always say, well, the next 5 years. However, I would say this time we are seeing, you know, with everything that's going on, I do believe that 5 years we're really going to see just some traction. I think the world is ready for it finally. You know, people, you know, it's respectful of people's schedules. People are more comfortable with technology. You know, it's just easier to do things online. At the end of the day, when a family has run their kids all over everywhere, you don't want to take an hour and a half or 2 hours to travel somewhere, and to be able to just sit down and take care of business online at night when things have settled down, or sometime during the day. I also think what we're going to see is probably some interesting technologies around identity proofing. And I think we're going to see some expansion on that. There's technology like the mobile driver's licenses that's being tested in some of the states. Utah's doing that, Arizona, I think Iowa maybe. But anyway, the mobile driver's license is a really interesting technology that could actually do away with some of the KBA stuff eventually, I think. And then we might see some more biometric technologies that come into play, you know, kind of like what you do at the airport with Clear and that sort of stuff. But you have to always remember, like all these technologies out there, when a vendor gets ready to look at changing some of the technologies, you have to keep it affordable, because the consumer and the notary and the pricing models, that's some of the problem in expansion of some of this stuff, is the affordability factor, is people aren't willing to pay for real high prices for things. But I do think we're going to see some advances in technology. Things are going to be easier. We're in some tough times right now where we're going to see, I think, some of these vendors that have started business just because they thought this was a cash cow, if you will. We're going to see them go away because business is changing, and you're going to, you know, be left with those who have some financial resources to stay in business as well. So I think that it's going to be an exciting time in the next few years. That's for sure.
Thank you. Thank you, both of you guys. Real quickly, I think in 5 years, here's another thing to consider. States will know the outcomes of notarizations performed in this manner. There maybe we'll have some disputes, maybe we'll have questions, maybe we'll have legal cases. In 5 years, what we may see is lawmakers and commissioning officers interested in going back and tweaking their laws and their administrative rules to better manage that, so that, you know, the outcomes are exactly what they anticipated when they passed the law and implemented the administrative rules in the first place. We're going to have a little bit of experience down the road that tells us what's working and what's not.
Yep. That's a good point.
That's a great point. Lori?
You know, my crystal ball broke years ago. I haven't been very active on any of it. What I guess I come at this one more from a hopeful standpoint than a for sure kind of thing. But I I think the potential is there to have a much more knowledgeable and educated notary force out there, and a knowledgeable public about what the purpose and what the reason for a notarization is. And I just think that because there's all this spotlight on the details around technology and all of that, it has opened a window toward improving the respect for the notarization of a document, because people really understand what it means, what it does, what it doesn't do. And my hope is that maybe it's not going to take 5 years to get there, but that we seriously do have a better, educated, more trustworthy environment for notarizations. Certainly more respect for them. It's important, and I think that the introduction of this technology certainly provides the stage for that to occur.
That's a great point, Lori. And on that, what I want to first start off the Q&A, and I know that we're getting close on time, but I want to start by thanking all three of the panelists for today. This has been an amazing discussion and lots of great information being shared. I know that our attendees have really enjoyed this, and I hope that everyone who listens to this in the future really gets a lot of information about the remote notary program. We do have a few questions out there, and I want to try to get us to address at least one or two of these. You mentioned something there, Lori, about the technology, and one of the challenges is we're finding that the signers need more than your average skills and technology to sign using a remote notary program.
Oh, yes, we are finding that.
That's awesome.
And it's going to be up to the notaries to provide that education. So the RON notaries have to not only be comfortable with the technology from their own use of it, but in helping their customers as well. It complicates the job.
I totally agree with that. And indeed, when we started Remote Notary at my firm, that was one of the challenges. We had to actually work with, of course, I'm one of the members of the training department, but we had to get the department together and create step-by-step articles for both the notary and the signers so that we could give them step-by-steps on how to walk through the process. One of the things I think that's important to note is you want to make sure when you're choosing a vendor that you're choosing one that has some educational materials that can help you step through the process. So that is going to be important as well. Any final closing remarks, y'all? Listen to me, I'm saying y'all, that's the Southern boy in me coming out.
Well, let the Southern girl jump right in there. You know,
well, come on.
We bringing it to you. We learn as much from these types of interactions as we hope to impart to you, because at the end of the day, it's the notary sitting there engaged with that principal signer who comes away with knowledge of how this is really shaking out. So, you know, I think I can speak to my colleagues. We welcome every opportunity for this kind of conversation, because this is all still very new, and being able to get the perspectives of actual users of this new way of notarizing is extremely valuable to us. So, you know, in that respect, this has been a hugely valuable conversation for us. And, you know, the hope takeaway is there are things we can bring to our colleagues and perspectives that will make it better for you in the long run.
And I would
Absolutely.
say, John, that you guys have been great about providing education, and and setting the formats for these kinds of discussions. And what a great, really, what a great opportunity for your association. And as Kathleen said, for us, we had so much fun preparing for this panel, and I was so grateful to Kathleen and Lori to be a part of this. And that is kind of what I said, hashtag dream team for me. So my many thanks to to them and to you, John and Brian, for setting this up, and to the association for having the insight to put these programs together.
Yeah. What Nancy said.
Well, thank you very much. Excellent.
What Nancy
So
and
just a
Kathleen
couple of
said.
closing things.
I just
Or
was reiterating what Nancy and Kathleen said.
Well, this has been my great honor to work with all three of you. It's always amazing to hear what's really going on by three true experts in the area. So it's been a great honor to do that. Folks, I have put their information on the screen, so please feel free to make a note of those email addresses if you have questions, comments. If you want to reach out to us, we do invite that. We also invite you to complete that evaluation poll. We would like to know your thoughts on whether you feel like this event was worth your time. Also, you're welcome to reach out to me if you have other recommendations for follow-up events. I know some of the questions we were not able to get to today, but I guarantee you we will be looking at those for possible topics in the future. Especially centered around one of the ones I'd like to see us answer, centered around changes in the KBA and the potential for identity verification and changes that are coming up in that. I'd like to see more information about that as well. So, but I'm excited about this. Thank you again. Nancy is the Senior Business Strategy Manager for DocVerify. They are one of our vendors for Remote Notary, and as a matter of fact, they're the ones that my firm uses. Very glad to claim that. Lori Hamm, she is the Notary Administrator for the Secretary of State for Montana, and of course, Kathleen Butler, the Executive Director of the American Society of Notaries. Thank you all very much. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
We
everyone.
appreciate yours. Thank you.
Take good care. Appreciate it.